Dark Art of Influence, an introduction to dark psychology. Have you ever felt like someone was playing with your mind? Like your thoughts weren't entirely your own? Every day, millions of people fall victim to psychological manipulation without even realizing it. The human mind, our greatest asset, can also be our greatest vulnerability. Welcome to Mind Diagnosis Lab. I'm Farshad, and in this new series we're diving into the shadowy world of dark psychology. Not to teach you how to manipulate others, but to help you recognize when you're being manipulated yourself. What you're about to learn might disturb you. It might make you question interactions you've had throughout your life. But knowledge is the most powerful defense against those who would use these techniques against you. So what exactly is dark psychology? Simply put, it's the study of the human condition in relation to the psychological nature of humans to prey on others. Dark psychology explores how humans deliberately and willfully take actions that bring harm to others, not through physical violence, but through the manipulation of thoughts, emotions, perceptions, and behaviors. Throughout history, those who understood these principles have wielded enormous power. From military psychological operations to cult leaders, from sophisticated scammers to abusive partners, the tactics may differ, but the fundamental principles remain the same. At the core of dark psychology are what psychologists call the dark triad. Three personality traits that, when combined, create the perfect psychological predator. First, narcissism, characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance, deep-seated envy, and exploitative behavior. Second, psychopathy, marked by a lack of empathy, absence of guilt, and impulsive behavior. And finally, Machiavellianism, defined by manipulation, deception, and a ruthless disregard for morality in pursuit of goals. While most people possess elements of these traits to some degree, those who score high in all three are particularly adept at psychological manipulation, and particularly dangerous to those around them. But why should you care? Because these techniques don't just exist in extreme scenarios. They're all around us, often in subtle forms we don't recognize until it's too late. In 1961, Yale University psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted what would become one of the most infamous experiments in psychological history. The setup was simple. Three people were involved: an experimenter in a lab coat, a teacher, the actual subject of the experiment, and a learner who was secretly an actor. The teacher and learner were placed in separate rooms, with the teacher instructed to administer increasingly powerful electric shocks to the learner whenever they answered a question incorrectly. The shock generator had 30 switches, labeled from 15 volts, slight shock, all the way up to 450 volts, danger, severe shock, and beyond. What the teachers didn't know was that no actual shocks were being delivered. The learners were acting. As the experiment progressed and the supposed voltage increased, the learners would begin to show discomfort, then pain, then beg to be released, and eventually fall silent, implying they had been rendered unconscious or worse. If the teachers expressed concern or wanted to stop, the experimenter would calmly respond with phrases like, "The experiment requires that you continue," or "You have no other choice, you must go on." The results were shocking. Milgram had hypothesized that maybe 1 to 3% of participants would administer the maximum voltage. Instead, 65% of participants continued to the maximum level, 450 volts, despite believing they might be seriously harming or even killing another human being. Let that sink in. 2/3 of ordinary people were willing to potentially kill a stranger simply because an authority figure in a lab coat told them to do so. The experiment revealed something profound and disturbing about human nature: our deep susceptibility to authority, and our willingness to surrender personal responsibility when directed by someone we perceive as an authority. This wasn't about sadism. Most participants were visibly distressed, sweating, trembling, and even having nervous laughs. They simply couldn't bring themselves to defy the calm, authoritative instructions to continue. Today, we encounter authority figures everywhere: doctors, police officers, bosses, experts on television. And while most use their authority ethically, dark psychology teaches us that this automatic deference to authority is a vulnerability that can be exploited by those with harmful intentions. In the early 1950s, Americans were shocked when some prisoners of war returning from Korea appeared to have been converted by their captors, confessing to war crimes they couldn't have committed and sometimes even refusing to return home. The term brainwashing entered the public consciousness, creating both fascination and fear. But what exactly is brainwashing, and how does it differ from normal persuasion? Brainwashing is an intense, forcible indoctrination process designed to completely alter someone's beliefs, attitudes, and perceptions. Unlike normal persuasion, which respects individual autonomy, brainwashing seeks to break down and rebuild a person's entire identity. This fear of mind control led the CIA to launch its own mind control program called MK-Ultra in the 1950s. Under this top-secret program, unwitting American and Canadian citizens were subjected to various mind control experiments involving hypnosis, sensory deprivation, isolation, verbal and sexual abuse, and perhaps most notoriously, the administration of LSD and other drugs without consent. In one sub-project called Operation Midnight Climax, the CIA set up brothels in San Francisco where unsuspecting men were given LSD and observed through one-way mirrors to see how the drug affected their behavior and susceptibility to manipulation. Whether conducted by enemy states or our own government, brainwashing typically follows three main stages. First, the breaking down of self, isolating the individual, attacking their identity, creating guilt and confusion until they reach a psychological breaking point. Second, the possibility of salvation, offering leniency and a way out, but only through confession and accepting new ideas. And finally, the rebuilding of self, creating a new identity aligned with the desired beliefs, reinforced through reward and community. While true brainwashing requires isolation and control that most of us won't experience, understanding these techniques helps us recognize when similar tactics are being used in milder forms, in high control groups, abusive relationships, or even aggressive marketing campaigns. The most dangerous forms of psychological manipulation aren't happening in secret government programs. They're happening in our everyday lives, often with people we know and trust. Let's explore some of the most common tactics used by manipulators. Emotional blackmail, using fear, obligation, or guilt to control someone's behavior. If you really loved me, you would, after all I've done for you. These phrases are red flags for emotional manipulation. Gaslighting, making someone question their own reality, memory, or perceptions. That never happened. You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. Over time, victims begin to doubt their own sanity, lying and creating illusions. Manipulators often create elaborate false narratives, mixing truth with fiction to confuse their targets and maintain control. Consider this real case documented by researchers. A single mother met a charming man who seemed perfect, attentive, loving toward her child, and supportive. Over time, he convinced her to isolate from friends and family, orchestrated the loss of her job, and eventually moved her to his apartment, where she became completely dependent on him. Once isolated and dependent, his true nature emerged. He subjected her to constant psychological and physical abuse. His manipulation was so effective that when he eventually gave her the option of how she would like to be killed, she actually considered it, believing she had no choice and deserved no better. The psychological impact of manipulation can be devastating. Victims often experience anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and a profound sense of loss. Loss of self-identity, loss of trust, loss of security. The biggest impact of dark psychology on anyone is that it produces a strong sense of loss. And perhaps most insidiously, those who have been victims of manipulation are at higher risk of either becoming victims again or becoming manipulators themselves, creating a cycle that can span generations. Knowledge is the first line of defense against psychological manipulation. Now that we understand some of the tactics used in dark psychology, let's explore how to protect ourselves. Self-awareness is crucial. Understanding your own vulnerabilities, your fears, insecurities, and desires helps you recognize when someone is trying to exploit them. Ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Is someone benefiting from my emotional reaction? Develop critical thinking skills. Question information, especially when it triggers strong emotional responses. Look for inconsistencies in what people tell you. Verify claims independently rather than taking them at face value. Learn emotional regulation. Strong emotions, especially fear, guilt, and love, can override our rational thinking. Techniques like deep breathing, mindfulness, and simply taking time before making decisions can help maintain your psychological autonomy. Set and maintain clear boundaries. Manipulators test boundaries gradually. If you don't enforce them early, they'll continue pushing. Practice saying no without justification and removing yourself from situations that feel wrong. Seek outside perspectives. Manipulators often isolate their targets because outside viewpoints threaten their control. Maintain connections with trusted friends and family who can offer objective feedback about your relationships and situations. Remember, manipulators count on your silence and isolation. Breaking that silence, whether by confiding in a friend, seeking professional help, or simply acknowledging to yourself what's happening, is often the first step toward breaking free. Before we conclude, let's examine one more landmark study that reveals the darker side of human psychology: the 1971 Stanford Prison Experiment. Stanford psychology professor Philip Zimbardo converted a basement into a mock prison and randomly assigned 24 psychologically healthy male students to roles as either prisoners or guards. The experiment was planned to last 2 weeks. Within just days, the guards began displaying authoritarian and sadistic behavior. They forced prisoners to do pointless, humiliating tasks, deprived them of sleep, and used psychological tactics to break solidarity among prisoners. The prisoners quickly showed signs of extreme stress, with some having emotional breakdowns. By the 6th day, the situation had become so toxic that the experiment had to be shut down, less than halfway through its planned duration. What makes the Stanford experiment so disturbing is that it wasn't about individual bad apples. These were normal, psychologically healthy students. The experiment revealed how easily ordinary people can adopt cruel behaviors when placed in positions of power and given implicit permission to abuse it. It demonstrates that situational forces and group dynamics can override individual personality traits and moral values, a phenomenon that helps explain how ordinary people can commit extraordinary acts of cruelty when caught in systems that enable or encourage such behavior. Dark psychology reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature, our susceptibility to authority, our vulnerability to manipulation, and our capacity for cruelty when given power over others. But understanding these darker aspects of psychology doesn't mean we're doomed to be either victims or victimizers. Knowledge is protection. By recognizing these tactics and techniques, we can defend ourselves against those who would use them against us. Remember, the goal isn't to become manipulators ourselves, but to recognize manipulation when it targets us, to take back control of our own minds and choices. If you found this information valuable, please subscribe to Mind Diagnosis Lab for the complete Dark Psychology series. In our next episode, we'll dive deeper into the mind of the manipulator, exploring the psychological profiles of those who use these techniques and the warning signs that someone in your life might be one of them. Until then, stay aware, stay critical, and remember, the most powerful defense against dark psychology is a mind that understands how it works.